I found out my uncle had been depositing money into my college fund for 20 years. He passed away before I could thank him. My name is Daniel. I am 28 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and 6 months ago I sat in an attorney's office for my uncle's estate reading and discovered that the man who had been my father's quieter older brother, a man I had known my entire life as someone who showed up at holidays, fixed things when they broke, and never asked for anything, had been depositing money into a college savings account in my name every single month for 20 years. My uncle's name was Frank. He passed away at 67 from a heart condition that had been building for years, and that he had managed privately in the way he managed everything, without making it a burden to anyone around him. Frank had never married. He had worked as an electrician for 40 years, had lived in a modest apartment, had driven the same truck for 16 years, and had been by every observable measure a man of simple and careful means. The account he had opened for me when I was 8 years old had a balance of $94,000. 20 years of monthly deposits. Some months more, some months less, always something. I had put myself through college on loans because my parents had not been able to contribute significantly, and because I had not known this account existed. I had graduated with $43,000 in student debt that I had been paying for 4 years. There had been $94,000 sitting in an account with my name on it for 4 years, while I made loan payments, and Frank had been alive and had said nothing. I asked the attorney why Frank had not told me. The attorney said Frank had updated his instructions twice over the years, and that both updates had said the same thing, that the account was to be disclosed at the time of his estate settlement, and not before, because he had not wanted it to change how I worked for what I was building. He had not wanted me to know it was there because he had wanted me to earn my life without the knowledge of a safety net. I sat in that attorney's office and I thought about 20 years of holiday dinners and broken things fixed, and a truck that ran for 16 years, and a man who had been quietly depositing money every month for a child he loved and had told no one. I paid off my student loans the following month. The remaining amount is in savings. I think about Frank every time I look at my bank balance. I think about the specific love of someone who gives without requiring acknowledgement, and who builds something for you in the years before you know you needed it built. I did not get to thank him. I have been trying to find a way to carry that, the gratitude with nowhere to go, and I have not fully found it yet. I have started depositing a small amount every month into an account for my niece. She is 4 years old. She does not know it exists. I am not going to tell her until the right time. I think Frank would understand that. Update, 3 months later. I found something last month in a box my father had kept from Frank's apartment. A photograph of Frank and me at my 8th birthday, the year he opened the account. I am sitting on his shoulders and he is laughing at something, and I am holding a balloon, and neither of us knows what he is going to do the following week when he opens a savings account at a bank and begins a 20-year conversation with a future version of me that I am only now receiving. I put the photograph on my desk. I look at it every morning. I think that some gifts arrive after the person who gave them is gone, and that arriving late does not make them less than gifts. I think Frank knew that. My sister has been pretending to be me at family gatherings for 3 years. My own parents did not notice my name is Christine. I am 33 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado. And 8 months ago I discovered that my younger sister had been attending family gatherings in my place for 3 years, telling our parents and extended family that she was me, that I was traveling for work, and that she was passing along my regards, and that our parents had not noticed that their older daughter had been replaced by their younger daughter at approximately 40 occasions over 3 years. My sister's name is Amanda. She is 30 years old, and we are not identical twins. We are regular siblings who look somewhat similar in the way of sisters from the same parents, but who are not so similar that the substitution should have been undetectable. The substitution was undetectable for 3 years. I found out because a cousin posted photographs from a family reunion I had believed I was not invited to, and that I had been told was canceled due to weather. I was in the photographs, standing next to my mother, holding a plate of food at a barbecue that had apparently not been canceled. The person in the photographs wearing my face was Amanda. I called my mother immediately and described what I was seeing in the photographs. My mother was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What do you mean that is not you?" I said it was not me. My mother was quiet for a longer moment. Then she said, "Oh, The investigation of those 3 years, which I conducted with the specific energy of someone who has just found out something that requires complete information before it can be processed, revealed the following. Amanda had been attending family events in my name because she had wanted more family contact than her own relationship with our family provided, and had decided that attending as me was more convenient than addressing the reasons her own attendance was complicated. She had told our parents I was too busy to attend, and had offered to come in my place and say hello from me and our parents. Had accepted this without examining it, because they had wanted family at the gatherings and Amanda showing up had satisfied that want. 3 years of satisfied want. 40 occasions. Our parents had not looked closely enough at their own children to notice the substitution. I want to be honest about which of those things bothered me more, because I have spent 8 months sorting through both of them. Amanda's substitution was strange and wrong and required a conversation about boundaries and identity, and what she had been trying to get by attending as me that she could not get by attending as herself. Our parents' failure to notice was a different and quieter wound. The specific hurt of understanding that the people who raised you have not been paying close enough attention to tell you apart from your sibling across 40 occasions and 3 years. Amanda and I have had 4 honest conversations about what she did. She has explained and I have heard her, and the explanation is complicated and human, and I understand it even though I have not fully accepted it. My parents and I have had 2 honest conversations about what they're not noticing meant, and those conversations have been harder because the explanation there is simpler, and the simplicity is the hard part. Update 4 months later. I attended a family gathering last month for the first time in years, a real attendance, in my own name, as myself. I sat next to my mother at dinner, and she looked at me once during the meal with the specific attention of someone who has been paying closer attention since a conversation required it. She said I seemed different than she remembered. I told her I had not changed. She said she thought maybe she had not been looking properly before. I told her I thought that was probably right, and that I was glad she was looking now. We had dinner. It was ordinary and it was a beginning, and I think beginnings that come after 3 years of substitution are worth having even when they come late. I was adopted at birth. At 35 I found my biological family. They lived 4 streets away from me my entire life. My name is Michael. I am 37 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and 2 years ago I found my biological family through a DNA testing service, and discovered that my biological mother had lived 4 streets away from the house I grew up in for the entirety of my childhood and adolescence. 4 streets. I had grown up in Portland in a house on a street I had lived on until I was 22, and my biological mother had lived on a street 4 minutes away for the same years, and we had existed in the same neighborhood for 2 decades without knowing we were in it together. I had been adopted at birth through a closed adoption. My adoptive parents, wonderful people who are my parents in every meaningful sense, had told me I was adopted from early childhood, and had always been open about what they knew, which was limited. The DNA test connected me to a cousin who was in the database and who, when I reached out, was willing to help me understand the family structure. Through the cousin I found my biological mother's name. Her name is Patricia. She is 61 years old. She had been 19 when she had me and had made the adoption decision under circumstances she described, when we eventually spoke, as the circumstances of a 19-year-old without support who had done what she had believed was right for a child she was not in a position to raise. Patricia had stayed in Portland. She had married, had 2 other children, had built a life 4 streets from where I grew up. She had driven past my childhood house. I showed her where it was when we eventually met, without knowing her firstborn son was growing up inside it. I had walked past her street thousands of times going to school, going to the park, going to the corner store, without knowing my biological mother was living on it. We met for the first time in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning 14 months ago. She was there when I arrived. She stood up when she saw me come through the door, and she looked at me for a moment in the specific way of someone seeing something they have imagined for 35 years arriving in a form they could not have fully anticipated. She said, "You look like your grandfather." I said I did not know what my grandfather looked like. She said she would show me photographs. We talked for 3 hours. I have met my biological siblings, 2 of them, both younger, both aware of my existence because Patricia had told them years ago. My biological brother is 28 and lives in Seattle. My biological sister is 32 and lives in Portland. We have had dinner twice. It is careful and real and building into something that I do not have a name for yet because the names available, brother, sister, family, belong to people I already have those relationships with. And these new relationships are their own thing that requires new vocabulary. My adoptive parents know everything and have been generous in a way that I did not take for granted, because generosity in that situation is not automatic, and theirs has been complete. My adoptive mother met Patricia last month. They had coffee for 2 hours. I was not there. It had been their idea to meet without me and I had agreed because it was the right thing. My adoptive mother called me afterward and said Patricia was a good person. I said I thought so too. She said she was glad I had found her. I said I was glad too, and I meant it in a way that contained more than the words. Update 4 months later. Patricia and I walked the neighborhood last month. My old neighborhood, her old neighborhood, the 4 streets between us that we had never known about. We walked from my childhood house to her old house, and we stood on the street, and we looked at both ends of the distance, and we did not say anything for a while. We walked back and we had coffee and we talked about ordinary things and I thought about the specific strangeness of a geography that had held us both without introducing us, and about what it means to find someone who was always close, and about whether close and found are always as different as they seem. My father left his entire estate to a charity I had never heard of. I investigated the charity and found out what it actually was. My name is Laura. I am 41 years old, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 16 months ago I sat in an attorney's office for my father's estate reading, and heard that my father had left his entire estate, the house, the savings, the investments, everything, to a charity called the Franklin Foundation for Youth Education. I had never heard of it. My father had never mentioned it. My brother James and I sat in that attorney's office and looked at each other across the table, and then looked at the document, and then looked at the attorney who was professionally composed in a way that told me he understood this was not a routine reading. The estate was not enormous, but it was significant. The house alone was worth approximately $280,000, and the total came to approximately $380,000. All of it to the Franklin Foundation for Youth Education. My brother wanted to contest immediately. I told him I wanted to investigate first because contesting without information felt like acting without understanding, and understanding felt more important than acting in the first week. I spent 3 weeks investigating the Franklin Foundation for Youth Education. What I found required a forensic accountant named Howard who spent 2 weeks going through public records and nonprofit filings, and who presented me with a report that was 41 pages, and that told me the following. The Franklin Foundation for Youth Education was a legitimate registered nonprofit. It had been operating for 11 years. It had a board of directors whose names I did not recognize. It had filed appropriate tax documents for 11 years. It had one primary program, a scholarship fund for first-generation college students in the Nashville area. It had funded approximately 40 scholarships over 11 years at amounts that were modest but real. It was, in every verifiable sense, what it said it was. What Howard also found, and this was the 41st page of the report, was the name of the person who had founded the foundation 11 years ago. The founder's name was Marcus Williams. Marcus Williams was a name I did not recognize. I went back to the attorney and I asked about Marcus Williams. The attorney said he was not able to share information about the foundation's relationship with my father beyond what was in the estate documents. I found Marcus Williams through the foundation's public filing. He was 53 years old, a retired teacher living in Nashville. I called him. He answered on the second ring. I told him who I was and why I was calling. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had been expecting a call, and that he was sorry for my loss, and that he would like to explain if I was willing to listen. Marcus Williams had been one of my father's students 40 years ago. My father had been a high school teacher in Nashville for 32 years, a fact I had always known. And Marcus had been in his class at 16 and had been, by Marcus's account, a student with ability and without resources and without anyone who had seen the ability clearly until my father had seen it. My father had helped Marcus get a scholarship for college. He had written letters. He had made calls. He had done the specific quiet work of a teacher who believes in a student and acts on the belief without requiring acknowledgement. Marcus had gone to college and then to graduate school, and then had spent 20 years as a teacher himself, and 11 years ago had founded the Franklin Foundation for Youth Education because he had wanted to do for other students what my father had done for him. My father had known about the foundation for 11 years. He had been a private donor for 11 years. He had left it everything because it was, in his understanding, the best use of everything. I sat with all of this for a long time. My brother James still wanted to contest. I told him I was not going to contest. I told him that our father had made a deliberate and informed decision to leave his estate to something he had been invested in for 11 years, and that his decision deserved to be honored. James was angry for a while. He has arrived somewhere that is not fully acceptance but is not active opposition. And I think somewhere that is not fully acceptance is where this story ends, and that it is an honest ending. Update 4 months later. The Franklin Foundation awarded 3 scholarships last month using a portion of my father's estate. I attended the ceremony. Marcus invited me, and I went because it felt important to be present for something my father had been building toward for 11 years without telling me. I sat in the back of a community center in Nashville, and I watched 3 18-year-olds receive scholarships, and I thought about my father standing in a classroom 40 years ago, seeing something in a 16-year-old boy that the 16-year-old boy could not yet see in himself. And I thought that was probably the best thing my father ever did, and that he had spent 40 years doing versions of it, and that the estate was just the last version. Marcus came to find me after the ceremony. He said my father had talked about me. He said my father had been proud of me. He said my father had told him once that his greatest regret was not having said that clearly enough to me directly. I stood in the back of a community center in Nashville, and I received that sentence, and I did not say anything for a while. Then I thanked Marcus and I drove home and I sat in my kitchen. And I thought about my father, and about what he had built, and about the sentence Marcus had given me, and I decided that arriving late was still arriving. My grandmother left me a letter that explained everything strange about my childhood. I was not allowed to open it until she passed. My name is Sarah. I am 32 years old, I live in Seattle, Washington, and 10 months ago I opened a letter my grandmother had given me when I was 16 with instructions that I was not to open it until after she was gone. She passed away at 84 last year. I had carried the letter for 16 years, through 4 apartments, 2 cities, 1 marriage, in a small wooden box she had also given me. The letter was 4 pages in her handwriting, and it explained things about my childhood that I had grown up with as mysteries, and that I had stopped asking about, because asking had always been redirected or deferred or answered with "we will talk about that when you are older," which had eventually become "we will talk about that someday," which had eventually become a silence I had accepted as the shape of certain questions. The first thing the letter explained was why my mother had left when I was 4. I had grown up being told my mother had been unwell, and had needed to go somewhere to get better, and had not come back. The letter told me the truth, which was more complicated than unwell, and more human than the explanation I had been given. My mother had struggled with addiction for years before I was born, and for the first 4 years of my life, and had made the decision to leave. Not been sent away, chosen to go because she had understood in a clear moment that her presence was doing more damage than her absence would. And she had left to protect me in the only way available to her at the time. She had been in recovery for 23 years. She was alive. My grandmother had been in contact with her for years, and had chosen not to tell me until I was old enough to receive the information, and had determined that old enough meant after she herself was gone, and could not influence my reaction. The letter contained my mother's contact information, a phone number and an address in a city 3 hours away. My grandmother had written at the bottom of the last page, "I am sorry for the waiting. I believed the waiting was right. You will decide if I was correct, and I will not be here to defend my reasoning, so I have tried to explain it as well as I can." I put the letter down. I sat with it for 3 weeks. I called the number at the end of 3 weeks. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. I said my name. She said mine back in a voice that told me she had been waiting for this call for 23 years. We talked for 2 hours. I have met her in person 4 times. She is 56 years old, and she has been sober for 23 years, and she is careful with me in the way of someone who understands that she is in a position that requires earning rather than assuming. I am careful with her in the way of someone who is building something new from material that has a complicated history. My grandmother was right that I needed to be old enough. I think I needed to be 32 specifically, old enough to understand addiction as a thing that happens to people rather than a thing that defines them, old enough to have my own stability before I introduced something this significant into it. I am not sure I would have arrived at that understanding at 22 or 25. I think my grandmother knew me well enough to know when I would be ready, and that the letter was her last act of paying attention to who I was. Update: 4 months later. My mother and I had dinner last month. Just the two of us, a restaurant halfway between our cities. We talked for 4 hours. At one point she said she had thought about me every single day. For 23 years. I told her I had not known she existed as a real person for most of those years, and that learning she did had been its own kind of recalibration. She said she understood, and that she was grateful I had called, and that she would be grateful every day going forward regardless of what the going forward looked like. I told her I was glad I had called too. We drove home separately, and I sat in my car for a moment before I started the engine, and I thought about a wooden box and 16 years of carrying something, and a grandmother who had known when to give me what I needed, and about the specific love of someone who plans ahead for the person you will be rather than the person you are, and I thought that was one of the better forms love takes when it has time and wisdom and the willingness to wait.